Dave Simon joining us here, talking some MMA. All right, let's talk about GSP. Obviously, big build-up. A long time that he was not in a competitive fight due to injury. His opponent, Carlos Condit, very esteemed fighter in the game as well. A lot of blood in the replays that I saw in this fight. It was a hard one, wasn't it?
Yeah, Carlos Condit took it to George St. Pierre. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. It was one of the best fights that we've seen all year. It was an absolute war. GSP, though, looking phenomenal, outstriking Carlos Condit, which is something I didn't expect him to do. He was able to get inside, and Condit never really able to get going, never really able to use his range and do...
Yeah, about 3-4 inches taller.
Yeah, but he really wasn't able to dominate the striking game like I thought he maybe would have been able to. George St. Pierre really took it to him, was able to take him down at will, it seemed like, and he opened him up with a nasty elbow in that first round. Condit got up and was a bloody mess, and it was a bloody fight from there on in. Condit, though, a very active guard, was able to do some real damage from his back, landing some sharp elbows. He put a beating on George St. Pierre's face. Both of those guys looked like monsters, really, coming out of the cage. They were beaten and bloodied. Condit came as close to beating George St. Pierre as anyone has in the past 5 years, which is very, very impressive. He knocked George St. Pierre down with that big high kick in the third round and almost finished him. He pounced on him, landed a few shots. George St. Pierre was able to recover and secure Condit back in his guard before getting back up to his feet. It was a scary moment for the Montreal fans at the Bell Center, and Carlos Condit very nearly became the UFC welterweight champion. He was very, very close to finishing GSP. It was almost like that Matt Serra fight all over again, just seeing George stumble back and fall. It was a scary moment there for a lot of George St. Pierre fans, and Condit,
and possibly for Dana White in the UFC as well.
Yeah, very possibly. George St. Pierre's a big pay-per-view draw, and Condit took it to him. It was a war. George St. Pierre looked great. He was dominant in the fight, but it wasn't an easy fight by any stretch of the imagination. Condit brought it and was one of the toughest fights for George St. Pierre that I've ever seen him in. It was a very, very tough one for George St. Pierre, and he was able to come out of it. He showed that he can deal with adversity, he can get knocked down, and he'll get back up.
And also fight after a long layoff as well, which is
huge. Long layoff, I think, is impressive, but to me, what really impressed me the most was the fact that he was knocked down, looked like he was almost knocked out, and was able to continue and even come back and win that third round. No one has tested George St. Pierre. No one has knocked down George St. Pierre since he lost to Matt Serra. No one has come close. You have the best in the world going up against GSP, and they are not doing any kind of damage to him. And Carlos Condit came very, very close. I mean, this guy is for real. He was a few punches away from beating GSP.
Where does he go from here?
There are different options out there for Carlos Condit. He could fight Martin Kampmann. Kampmann was knocked out in the co-main event, and Kampmann actually is the only other guy in the UFC now to hold a victory over Carlos Condit. So Condit has talked in the past about wanting to fight Martin Kampmann. I could see that fight being made at some point. I could see Carlos Condit fighting, either the winner or maybe even the loser of a BJ Penn, Rory McDonald fight that's going to take place in a couple weeks' time. So there are options out there for Carlos Condit. I think Kampmann is the best option. But there are definitely a lot of good fights out there. And he showed, that he is a star now. He was made into a star throughout this whole process, and now he's fought George St. Pierre. All of his fights will mean more, and he'll make more money going forward because he was in that cage with George St. Pierre.
All right, now speaking of GSP, where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's the big question. George St. Pierre didn't seem like he really wanted to fight Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva was at a pre-fight to press conference, and he said he wanted GSP. You want to hear from Anderson, see what he says?
I would love to hear that, sure.
Let's hear from Anderson.
I have my plans. The George, for a long time the people talked to, hey, Anderson and George St. Pierre, Anderson, George St. Pierre. This time, the people talked Anderson and John Jones. Anderson and John Jones. My first goal is the George St. Pierre's fight, the super fight. And the second goal, maybe John Jones. I don't know. This is not my decision. This is Dana's decision.
I think Dana's decision should be Anderson Silva fight John Jones. I think that makes more sense. I think that they are closer in size. I think that Anderson Silva is so much bigger than George St. Pierre, and GSP does not seem that interested in that fight. Anderson saying they'd fight at 177. You got to understand, Anderson Silva is a 185-pound champion. George St. Pierre is a 170-pound champion. Anderson's able to go up to 205 pounds and dominate in the few fights that he's had up there. He is a very big middleweight, and George St. Pierre is not a gigantic welterweight. Even if they were to fight at 177 pounds, Anderson could still then balloon up come fight day to maybe 210, 220, and George St. Pierre's not really going above 185, maybe 190 if he's lucky. So the size difference is very, very big, and I don't know if this fight is ever going to get made. So I think for George St. Pierre right now, he's got a few options. He's got Johnny Hendricks, who looked phenomenal, who's 14-1, who knocked out Martin Kamen in 46 seconds on Saturday night. He's got Nick Diaz, who's coming back from suspension in February. That would be a great fight, and I know George St. Pierre wants to fight Diaz. And, he's got potential rematches with John Fitch, maybe a matchup with Damian Maia. John Fitch and Damian Maia are fighting early next year, and the winner of that fight could really make a claim at being that next number one contender. So you're looking at the next 2 years of opponents for George St. Pierre. There are 4 or 5 guys right now that you can look at welterweight that would be great options for George St. Pierre, and I think that those will be his options. I think he'll continue and fight 170-pounders, and this Anderson Silva talk will be just that. It'll be talk, and maybe we'll get Anderson Silva and John Jones, which I think makes more sense at this point in time.